Hi everyone. Hello. One of the key things that I want to start with today is this. We've been inspired this morning by examples of technology and robotics and automation and amazing things that not only push our militaries forward, but push society forward, push all of us forward, and push our organizations forward. But the key thing that I want to reinforce is innovation is not all about technology. Innovation is not just about products and developing new products for our organizations to sell. Fundamentally, Marcus has introduced to you the whole notion of culture and how important culture is not only to our organizations, but to countries and to the world. And I think culture is one of the core things that helps us drive innovation across our organizations. Like Marcus shared with you earlier, coming to places like Turkey and specifically Istanbul is a really great opportunity, and it's a privilege and an honor for me. And one of the things I like about Turkey and about coming to Istanbul is the core parts of your culture. The warmth, the accommodation, the friendship, and the hospitality. 5 minutes after I landed at your new fantastic airport, by the way, 5 minutes after I landed yesterday, my good friend Hussein Goulet, if any of you know Hussein, he's the innovation director at Kastamonu here in Istanbul. Within 5 minutes of landing at the airport yesterday, Hussein sent me a message. Chris, it's great that you're back in Istanbul. It's great that we can spend some more time together. I'm now going to take you and do something that I've promised you for the past 2 years. We're going to go and meet my barber. A proper Turkish haircut and a proper Turkish beard trim. That's why I look so cool, right? Barbers in the UK are okay, but they're not a patch on a proper Turkish barber. So we went for a haircut and a beard trim, and then went out for a meal, and we talked about his business and the things that we've helped do for his organization, and we talked about what I was going to talk about today. And the core thing that I want to talk to you about is why I think strategy, leadership, and culture should eat breakfast together. But what I want you guys to do is to do something different with the information that I'm going to share with you today. It's easy to come to conferences like this and sit back and enjoy presentations and talks and be inspired to do new things and be inspired to think differently. But I want you to go one step further. I want you to take action, genuine change, action once you leave this conference at the end of today and tomorrow. When you go back into your organizations, coming to a conference like this should be about change, and it should be about you guys not just being inspired by great speakers, but about you learning something and taking that new insight away into your organizations. So all the slides that I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to make available for you guys to have. What I'm also going to make available is a PDF, which has more information in it about innovation and about strategy, about leadership, and about culture. And I've built the slides, the PowerPoint slides that you'll see today, with a set of notes underneath them. And what I encourage you to do as leaders in your organizations is use the slides and use the PDF to have the conversation in your organization with your leadership team that I'm going to share with you today. because what I'm going to share is an honest overview of the state of innovation around the world. What I also encourage you to do is to go online when you get a few minutes and look up www.thefutureshapers.com. The Future Shapers was a platform I launched about 2 years ago now to help organizations around the world and help people like you gain access to insight, to thought leadership, and to thinking on innovation. So I encourage you to visit that platform. What I'm also going to talk to you about is this. This is a book called Building a Culture of Innovation. It's a book we launched 2 years ago with 2 other co-authors, and I'm going to share some of the things that we talk about in the book. But what I'm even more excited about is that thanks to the help of TTGV and Optimist, who are the publishers here in Istanbul, we now have the Turkish version of Building a Culture of Innovation. So for all of you that really want to understand how to build innovation as a capability, we've now worked incredibly hard to translate the whole book into the fantastic Turkish language. Who here has heard of Peter Drucker's famous quote? Yeah? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. My challenge is I think that was true probably 10 years ago. I think culture was the driving force for any organization before the crash of 2008, before Lehman Brothers. What Lehman Brothers did for us in 2008, despite all the negative impact that Lehman Brothers crash had on all our organizations and the whole world, what it did was gave us the catalyst for genuinely changing our organizations, genuinely changing how we lead nations, how we build countries. It gave us a sense of urgency and a sense of immediacy that we had to start to do things differently if we wanted our organizations not just to survive, but to thrive. If we wanted to drive growth and drive value, we had to start doing things differently. So we wrote this in response from our publisher asking us to build a guide to help organizations like you and help leaders like you and future leaders that we have in the audience understand how to start to build innovation as a capability in our organizations. And I genuinely believe, like it says on the front of the book, if we make innovation practical and we build it into the fabric of our organizations, we all stand a chance of doing genuinely exceptional things. The challenge is, we now have huge amounts of data and insight available to us all about the state of innovation globally in companies all over the world. The challenge that we actually face is the majority of that insight and that information and that data builds a very inconvenient picture of the state of innovation maturity across the world. And I want to share some of that insight with you. Some of these numbers and some of these statistics appear negative at first hand because they paint the real picture of how organizations are driving innovation across the world. But I share them because I want to push you guys to think bigger, to think differently. I want to push you guys to genuinely figure out answers to the questions and the challenges that I'm going to share. Because when you do that, you'll demonstrably shift your organizations forward. So what we know from surveys all over the world by all the big consultancies is that you guys, leaders of amazing organizations understand that innovation is absolutely crucial. You all know that innovation is core to the success and the growth and the value that you need to drive in your organizations. But let me ask you these two questions. Who's confident, genuinely confident in their organization's ability to lead and shape their industry? We all talk about innovation. We've all probably got innovation maybe in the strapline of our company. We've probably got innovation in our annual report or our corporate strategy. The data that we gather every year suggests that there's more talk than action. That the picture that we paint as organizations isn't actually what happens inside them. So here are some facts. Every year, my team collates all the global innovation surveys from every year. So in December, we collated all the innovation surveys throughout 2018. And we pull all that data together, and all of that data is a response to a set of questions in those surveys by people like you, by CEOs and leaders of organizations around the world. And this is what the data tells us. That 53% of you guys, 53% of leaders, still unsure about what innovation actually means. Still unsure about how to lead strategically for innovation. That many of you, despite what we portray as the truth about our organizations, many of you are unclear about how you lead innovation in your organizations. These are the challenges that I want you to take back to your organizations. I want you to take them back into the boardroom, and I want you to ask your fellow directors, your fellow board members, and your fellow leaders if some of these statistics are true about your organization. And if you ask them honestly, and if some of those answers are actually yes, we think that we genuinely don't understand how to lead for innovation, or we don't have a strategy for innovation that's aligned to our corporate strategy. If that's true, then start to solve that problem. Start to change how you look at strategy as an organization, and start to change how you look at leadership. What we also know from all the research and the work that we do with clients around the world is that the third thing that organizations still struggle with, and that isn't right if we want innovation to be a core driver of our success, the third pillar that organizations still need to focus on is culture. And Mark has talked about the importance of culture earlier. I'm not talking about a digital culture or a learning culture or an empathy-driven culture. I'm talking about, as leaders, how have we built the right culture in our organizations to drive innovation across the board? Not just in product, not just in service, not just in customer experience, not just internally in terms of processes and efficiencies, but innovation across the whole of our organizations. And we still know from all this data that 66% of senior leaders say it's still difficult to share knowledge and understanding and learning across organizations. So if these numbers are true, it means it's incredibly difficult to drive innovation and build a culture of innovation in our organizations. So my challenge to you is download these slides. I'm going to send a tweet or we'll post something on LinkedIn after I've come off stage. We'll send you all a link. You can all download these slides. You can all download the PDF that goes with them. Take all this back to your organizations and have new, honest conversations about what's true in your organization, and then what action you're going to take to do something about it. IBM did a study several years ago, and it uncovered that 60% of senior leaders and CEOs say that creativity is the core leadership skill and mindset that they believe will push their organizations forward. Now, when we talk about leaders being creative and CEOs being creative, we don't necessarily want them to be the creatives. But in order to build an innovation-led culture and an innovation-led organization, creativity is a core component of what needs to be in place. So what we talk about when we work with leaders is not making them the creatives, but helping them understand what creativity is and how to lead for creativity. A brilliant sporting example is some of the best coaches and trainers in any sport anywhere in the world are not the best sportsmen. The best boxing trainers in the world aren't necessarily the best boxers. The best football trainers in the world aren't necessarily great footballers. But what they absolutely know is what great technique is, what the pragmatic things that athletes need to put in place are. They know how to get the best out of those athletes, how to get the best out of those people in order for those people to be the best footballers, to be the best boxers. And leadership's no different. As leaders, we need to understand how and what we need our people to do, how we need them to behave, what mindset we need them to have, and our job is to inspire them and bring out the best in all those people. So I encourage you as leaders, have a look at how you can start to be more creative in your organizations. Who here has activity in their organizations around lean startup or design thinking or outcome-driven innovation? Many of you, right? When we look at techniques and frameworks and mindsets like that, to Marcus's point, we're putting the customer right at the heart of that process. Jobs to be done or outcome-driven innovation, even design thinking, the fundamental premise is, how well do I know the customer? How well do I know their world? How well are we observing them? And how deep can we get in terms of unearthing the problems that they face and the opportunities that we can create for them? So we're teaching people, and you guys will be teaching your people, frameworks like that, like design thinking. The challenge is that our organizations themselves aren't set up to allow thinking and frameworks and methodologies like design thinking or jobs to be done to thrive. And here's the reason. If we unpack design thinking into 3 core disciplines, the first is, as a design thinker, how do we unearth a problem and then define it? So how do we find things that need to be solved, and how do we define those as problems? The second part of the design thinking process then is, how do we then creatively solve those problems? And the third part of that process is then, how do we then develop the right solution and get that solution to market? Here's what most organizations struggle with. How can we define problems and opportunities when the majority of people making strategic decisions don't know enough about our customers? To Marcus's point earlier, proximity to our customers is absolutely critical if we're going to unearth opportunities and high-value problems that we need to solve for them. So using things like design thinking and empathy and all the different techniques at our disposal are absolutely crucial. The challenge is we're still running our organizations where the people making strategy and the strategic decisions are too far away from customers. So as leaders, my challenge to you is when you go back to your businesses, how can you change things in your organization so that you start to understand much more and much deeper about your customers? The second thing is this: 66% of major businesses claim it's difficult to share knowledge and understanding. What they mean about that is it's difficult to collaborate inside organizations. Yet innovation and design and problem solving fundamentally demands that we collaborate much better in our organizations. So my second challenge to you as leaders is, how can you change and make it much easier for people to collaborate inside and outside your organizations if you want to drive innovation? And here's the most worrying one. Even if you have unearthed a really high-value problem, you've defined it and you've created a phenomenal solution to that problem, all the data from all the surveys still suggests that the majority of big companies are taking just as long to get new ideas to market as they did 5 years ago. Yet we all know and we all admit that the pace of the world and the pace of change is increasing. So my third challenge to you as leaders is, how can you figure out and what can you put in place and what can you change to make your organizations faster, to make them more adaptable, to focus on experiments that you heard from Marcus earlier, to do much more testing and experimentation in order that you can get solutions to market faster. So I'm going to summarize some of these numbers for you now. And as I said earlier, these are all on the slides that I'll share and on the PDF that goes with it. The companies that I work with and my team work with, we specifically work with companies that say, we want to be pioneers. We want to push further and faster forward than anyone else in our sector. We're super ambitious. We want to be known globally as an innovation leader. The reality for most organizations and the challenges that we have to help them solve start with this. 75% of senior leaders think that they already have a culture of innovation, experimentation, risk-taking, and creativity. So at board level, when we ask clients whether they think they have this in place, 87% of them say yes. Here's the killer. Only 37% of employees agree. Your job as leaders, if you want to be innovation-led, if you want to shape the future, if you want to be pioneers, your job as leaders is to close that gap. Your job as leaders is to have 87% or 90%, ideally 100% alignment across your organization around strategy, leadership, culture, risk-taking, all of the things that you've heard everyone talk about today. And it's not your people's fault. It's not your middle manager's fault. It's no one else's responsibility other than yours as leaders. That's why you're in leadership roles. That's why you are a leader in your organization. The responsibility for solving these challenges starts with you. Maybe there's alignment, or the misalignment is because over half of the companies that are surveyed globally don't actually have a formal innovation process. Maybe that's why the alignment is there. Or maybe it's the fact that when you ask organizations what they really focus on, whether they're looking to be disruptive or looking to really change the game, where does their organizational effort go in terms of innovation? The majority of responses come back to a focus on incremental innovation, on incremental change. And we all know as leaders that incremental change isn't sufficient to really push our organizations forward. It's not ambitious enough. So my challenge again to you is think about how ambitious your organization is when it comes to innovation. Start to quantify all the work that you're doing, everything that you label as innovation in your organization, and decide whether it's really pushing your organization forward or whether it's just more continuous improvement or incremental innovation. And all of that as a summary is probably why only 40% of the organizations globally, and most of the organizations that we work with, consider themselves a pioneer in their industry today. My ambition for everyone in this room is that in a few years I come back, spend some more time in Istanbul, and the majority of your organizations say, Chris, we are genuinely a pioneer in our industry. We've pushed Istanbul forward, we've pushed Turkey forward, because we've genuinely, as leaders, challenged ourselves, pushed our organizations forward, we've built a culture of innovation, we've measured it with the right KPIs, and we are now considered a pioneer in our industry. That's how we should think as leaders. As I said at the start of this talk, I want you all to go away today, and I want you to start to think differently. I want you to go back into the boardroom on Monday or Tuesday, whenever you're back at work. Gather your senior team round and say, some of the things that Chris presented to us on Friday, we need to talk about. And we've downloaded the slides, so we've got the material, and I'm going to present it back to you now. And we as a senior team need an honest conversation about some of these things. What I also want you to do is consider these. These are 6 questions that we're helping 3 different global brands answer at the moment. They're big and they're challenging questions. But these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves as leaders and as organizations. And I challenge you to ask these questions back in your organization. The first one is this. Is what we're doing now, today, and is our strategy working well enough to deliver the kind of growth and value that we say that we want? It's a really tough question. You've got to be really honest as leaders. And if the answer is no, what are you going to do? And where are you going to go next? The point to that question is, if the answer is no, you need to shift your organization and your strategy today. The second question is more about you as leaders. If you decide that the answer to question 1 is no, and you then say, so what are we going to do and where are we going to go next? What do you need to do as leaders to shift the organization in that direction? My challenge to you is, I think executive education and leadership development specifically is broken. I think leadership development as we know it today is outdated. What we've all been taught to do and how we've been taught to lead as senior people throughout our career has got us to today, but it isn't going to help us shape the future. The capability, the mindset, the behavior of leaders, if we want them to push our organizations forward, needs to change. So my challenge to you is, how are you going to develop yourselves and your leaders differently if you decide that you need to answer question 1 in a very different way? The third question is, doing something that significant as a leader means you're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to do something with your organization demonstrably different, and it's going to be dramatic. Ask yourselves, what does different and dramatic look and feel like if you're a leader? And how will you bring that alive on a daily basis? Because the key to all this, as you heard from Marcus earlier and as you've heard from me, is the people in your organizations are the ones that will deliver the innovation that you require. The culture that you build and how you lead and the strategic direction that you take is absolutely critical if you want to shape the future. The next thing is about shifting from short-term to long-term thinking. If you read any of Simon Sinek, if any of you know him, if you read any of his work on shifting from what he calls the infinite game, the finite game to the infinite game. It's about shifting from short-term perspectives and short-term goals and short-term KPIs and benchmarking ourselves against our next nearest competitor and changing the whole way that we look about our organization and the way that we look at the future of our organization and how sustainable it is. So ask yourself whether you can make the shift from short-term to long-term strategic thinking. You may have all heard the term innovation theater, i.e. purporting to innovate, telling the world that you innovate, making it look like you're doing lots and lots of cool stuff when actually you're not delivering any value. Some can argue that innovation theatre is dead because it doesn't deliver value. But what it does do is it energizes organizations. So my challenge is, innovation theatre is okay if it's used strategically. Think about the theatre and the activity in your organizations that can help re-energize the whole organization in pursuit of innovation, help re-energize people, and help re-energize your whole culture so that you can pursue something bigger and bolder and different and more valuable. And the final thing is, like we talk about in the book, what does our whole culture need to look like? What does our ecosystem need to look like? How do we work internally? How do we lead people? How do we inspire them? But then how do we do that on the outside? How do we collaborate and co-create solutions with strategic partners and with our customers? And maybe, if the end result is valuable enough, maybe even with our competitors. Think about how you're going to build that ecosystem as an organization. So I'm conscious that some of that has built a negative picture about the reality of innovation. But our job as leaders is to ask the tough questions and to solve those tough questions. When we do that as leaders, we have to be in the right mindset. If we, as organizational leaders, aren't inspired on a daily basis to push our organizations forward and do something different, then we'll never change those organizations. We'll never push our countries forward. We won't change nations. We won't shape the future of the planet. The responsibility is ours. So my final challenge to you as leaders is this. Who's heard of the term VUCA? You all heard of that? So for those of you that don't know, VUCA was a term created by the American military, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. If as a leader and a senior decision maker and an influencer, you view the VUCA world as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, think about the mindset that you have. Think about how that perspective on the world influences the way you make decisions, the way you lead people, how much risk you're prepared to take, therefore how much experimentation you're prepared to do. Think about that. So if you think the VUCA world is as some of the scaremongering in the news has been for the past few months, that we're on the verge of a global recession, you'll have a negative view of that VUCA world. What we teach leaders to do is focus more on stuff like this. At the World Economic Forum recently in Davos, it was floated that the fourth industrial revolution is predicted to unlock $3.7 trillion worth of economic value. The VUCA that I want you to take away from here as leaders is our version of VUCA. We think leaders need to define VUCA as being visionary, unbounded, creative, and ambitious. If that's how you look at VUCA, then you'll ignore anyone floating the concept of a global recession, and you'll say, do you know what? Everyone else can go down in flames thinking that the world's going to enter into another recession. We're going to chase some of the $3.7 trillion worth of value that the fourth economic industrial revolution is going to unlock. That's the VUCA I want to believe in. That's what I want you to chase as leaders. That's why I think strategy, leadership, and culture need to work together. Your job as leaders is to combine those three core things. I'm going to make the link available to the slides and the PDF. We'll put it on Twitter, we'll put it on LinkedIn. If you don't get it, email me or contact me directly, download it, take it back to your organizations, and do these three things. Share it, discuss it, answer the questions that you need to answer, and then start to shape the future for your organizations, for Turkey, and for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I look at
Yeah,
that?
of course.
Bir inovasyon kültürü inşa etmek, şirketler için pratik bir
You said that much
çerçeve.
better than me. Yeah.
How do you pronounce?
Building a culture of innovation.
Building a culture of innovation. Thank you very much
No
for
problem.
coming. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
It's actually valuable, and
Yeah.
we would like to express our gratitude to your valuable contribution to Innovation Week Turkey. Bu vesileyle Tim Başkanımız, Türkiye İhracatçılar Meclisi Başkanımız Sayın İsmail Gülle'yi sahneye davet etmek istiyoruz. Would you like to join me in the center of the stage, please? Ve Sayın İsmail Gülle, Tim Başkanımız Markus'a bugünün anlam ve önemine binaen plaket takdiminde bulunuyor. Strateji geliştirmek, inovasyonu içselleştirmek ve toplu bir hareket olarak inovasyon yaratabilmek.
Very good.